Good morning, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started here. Thank you, Full House. I love seeing that. Hopefully everybody enjoyed yesterday, got to enjoy the reception a little bit. Another fun-filled day for you folks. So today, I'm pretty excited about this one. Obviously, you can see the title. The title is How to Commit Insurance Fraud, a Guide to Stealing Money, Fooling Regulators, and Living Comfortably. Right? And it's not going to be any surprise who I have up here, and we are lucky to have. We have Commissioner Navarro. He is a Delaware Commissioner. He is actually the 26th Commissioner of Delaware. He's also the chair of the Anti-Fraud Task Force, the Vice Chair of the Market Regulation and Consumer Affairs D Committee, and many other hats, if you know Commissioner Navarro. He has been with the Anti-Fraud Task Force and been great for many years. Jim Black is also with us, and Jim is the founder of Black and Gross PC. He concentrates his practice in a complexity of litigation, transactional matters involving reinsurance, finance, and working with regulator relations. So with that, gentlemen, I'm going to go ahead, and we're getting the TV up here real quick, so if you want to bear with us just a second. Let me go ahead. Oh, and the mics, could we test the mics?
You forgot to mention the Eagles one.
Okay. And I would be remiss if I did not mention, I'm going to apologize for the Kansas Cityans in the area here. We do have two very strong Philadelphia Eagles fans.
Go Birds!
Yeah, that did not help me. And I guess we have, okay. Chiefs, come on, Chiefs. Hey, all right. So anyway, I'm very happy to have them here. I'm going to turn it over to you, gentlemen. Thank you very much. No, are we still down a mic?
I don't have a mic. Did you try that one? I think, hit it. All right. All right, we're going to share this one.
Okay. All right.
Insurance fraud is not normally a crime of violence.
No.
First rule.
But we've seen that.
Yeah, we have seen that.
Yeah. So, good morning, everyone. All right. You know, usually they give us the 5:30 slot on the last day when there's no one around, so we're grateful to have a slot just before lunchtime, and we're grateful for all the folks who thought that we had a really catchy name. One of my colleagues said that, wow, I love the name of your seminar. It might stink, but a lot of folks are going to come and show up and hopefully participate. So thank you for that sort of vote of confidence. So we're going to move into the next slide. Jim, that's your cue. You're at the...
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Really a pleasure to be here again. And I know we have several friends in the room who I've seen Trini and I do this a few times, and we have gone through different insurance frauds that we have dealt with over the past years in all different sectors: life insurance, reinsurance, violent frauds. So I was trying to do something that was a little bit new. Obviously, the title is meant to be a little bit provocative. It's not supposed to be the best thing about this seminar, but it's supposed to be a little bit whimsical, and hopefully it's a little bit entertaining. So, in terms of, Trini made fun of me for the word immutable. So this comes because I figure what we have in common is we all spend a lot of time walking through airports. And if you stop at the bookstore, you'll see, Maxwell's The Immutable Laws of Leadership. And there's always a book, right? There's a book about leadership. There's a book about the 4 laws of investing. There's 6 laws of a happy marriage, apparently. But I could never find the crime book. And the same principles seem to recur again and again. And I figured there's got to be a crime book out there. Apparently there's not. So you're the test audience when you hopefully next year when you're passing the kiosk in the airport, you'll see our How to Commit Insurance Fraud book.
So this for the non-lawyers,
yeah.
Right? Who knows what immutable means? Non-lawyers. Good, sir.
Unchanging.
That's close. I got unchangeable, but yeah, that's technical. But I don't know if many of you had an opportunity to see Sean O'Brien's presentation. He's with the Maryland Department of Insurance, former FBI agent. Is Sean here? He left? Yeah. this is a really good segue from what he spoke about knowing your victims, things of that nature. And we have this first slide that talks about the 5 things. Invest in your crime, select your victims wisely, have a backup plan, prepare for change, and the next great scam is already here. And Jim, this is your part.
Yep, so this goes back a bit because, back to Aristotle. And he said the greatest crimes are not those committed for the sake of necessity, but for the sake of excess. And I think it's important that we understand that we're not talking about the fraud that the poor commit, the insurance fraud, the desperate, or the stupid, right? We're here to talk about what is in common about these professional con artists. And these first rules are that, the person who commits big fraud has to be a respected member of the community that they steal from. So what the next great fraud, what all the past frauds back to Aristotle have had, what all the great frauds that we have, the largest frauds that we've investigated, is that these folks are incredibly dedicated to their crime. They invest a lot of dollars in becoming the most respected member of the community that they're in. We had, Freestone a few years ago. It was an investment fraud. The steps that Alexander Burns took to create a false persona, it took him, he was working on it for 12 years. He got himself on, he created false educational background. He got himself onto the board of the Guggenheim. He became a member of IAIR. He was their featured speaker because he had the next great black box solution to investing. And eventually, people fell for it. And eventually, he got control of an insurance company and did incredible amounts of damage. So these are not folks, and it's always been a mystery to me as to how it is that great criminals don't just get a job, because they're always intelligent. They work incredibly hard. Some of them work 20 hours a day. And Trini and I, when we talk about the 2 that we did this year, it's amazing how incredible, how energetic a criminal is in order to pursue their illicit gains. They put their money back into it. They put their time into it. And most importantly, they understand a great principle of investing, which is leverage. And they invest in relationships. And those friends, those folks that help them steal, are lawyers, accountants, actuaries, captive managers, bankers, brokers, appraisers, reinsurers, tech support. We've had charities that are all in on assisting the fraud. We've had foreign governments assist on the fraud. And, that's what the great con artists understand. They understand that once they bring somebody into their circle, they tend to stay in their circle. They'll put their credibility, their money on the line. And that makes it so much more difficult for us as investigators, as regulators, to pierce through and find where the crime is behind the mask.
Did you mention the rule of thirds?
Yeah, so this actually came up in the last 18 months. Trini and I we were doing a...
They know me as commissioner.
Sorry. I always thought superintendent.
Friends and family call me Trini.
Yeah, all right.
Yeah. I'm friends with some of them.
Commissioner Navarro and I were interacting with the FBI this year, and as they were pursuing and investigating one of the crimes that we were pursuing from the insurance investigatory realm, I said to them, we're worried about the victims. And our rule has always been that when victims of a crime, it goes into thirds. 1/3 are truly innocent victims. 1/3 of those victims saw something wrong and decided to look the other way. It didn't feel right, or they were making a little bit too much money, or the premium was lower than anything they could get elsewhere, and they knew something wasn't right. Or they knew that this person was getting them insurance after they had been turned down 6 times. But suddenly, by changing their applications, this person was getting them. So 1/3, I would say, are truly innocent. They were sheep that were shorn. The others, they kind of went along. But 1/3 of them are truly part of the crime. They're co-conspirators. So this all came up earlier this year when Trini and I were working on a captive manager who has done incredible damage. And we said to the FBI, it's very important that we take care of the innocent victims. And he said, we haven't found any. Your rule of thirds, we're like 99% willfully blind or co-conspirators and only 1% innocent victims. I'll talk about that a little bit later. But it's also true, and I just want to say, this rule of thirds is also true of the professionals that will come into the regulators' offices. These guys don't come in wearing masks, right? They come in looking like they are the smartest, they are the best, they have the best solution to whatever the problem is, and they come in with sometimes the best lawyers, the best actuaries, the best accountants. And if you look at those folks who are bet the crime, about a third of them are completely taken in. About a third of them know there's something wrong, but don't really say anything and continue to put their credibility behind the problem. And about a third of them were in on the deal from the beginning.
So I'm looking at the list, I'm looking at the rule of thirds and how many lawyers in the room? I can't, okay. What do you call a lawyer with a 50 IQ? Your Honor. I told that joke in New Jersey. It was right after the senator was arrested, and that didn't go over very well. But you have to know your audience. Last one. What do actuaries use for birth control? Their personality. Okay, next slide.
So one of the common characteristics that you will have seen, again, from the beginning of time until today, is that good crooks select their victims wisely. It's always been true that certain communities would never rat out the person that steals from them. They could be drug dealers, they could be terrorists, they could be it could be the mob. They were always a great partner.
Until and unless they kill you.
Yeah, they have a different standard of justice. But more recently, we've seen more and more insurance fraud that is that is following the rule to select your victims wisely. But we had two this year in the last 18 months. One which was an agency that specialized in undocumented communities. So this insurance agent that we're going to talk about, she stole just absolutely killed these folks, but we couldn't get any cooperation because they were afraid when we show up, when we have badges, or we send out our investigators, or we send out someone with an insurance department or an attorney general or any other type of official, their community is trained or is so afraid of what the other consequences could be to their lives that we know that they're being preyed upon, and yet we couldn't get them to cooperate.
Yeah, they were the perfect victims. Folks who, especially in this era, who are in many cases undocumented. In many cases, just lost my screen. I may have done that. There we go. In many cases, they come from a country where law enforcement isn't respected, where law enforcement is the bad guy. So this was, and I know we'll get into it a little bit later, but this was the perfect crime and the perfect victims. And that's sort of the theme of this presentation, is that know your victims, cultivate your victims. And this lady took, we know that there were many, many more victims. We haven't been able to find them. They're not coming forward.
And then on the other side of the economic spectrum, we saw a captive manager who essentially sold tax deductions. And in order to get that tax deduction, he and his organizations, he had almost 14, I think, corporations involved. He basically promised and set up captives and set up reinsurance schemes and so forth, so that folks who had very, very large income and capital gains that year, such as the sale of major dental practices or the sale of a building or something, he promised them essentially a tax write-off that could eliminate that gain in the form of an insurance premium. Well, so $8 million was transferred in an insurance premium. $6 million immediately was within 30 days, went back to the person who had invested it. The crook kept 2. The person had an $8 million tax write-off. And the whole thing was a scam from the beginning. It was essentially a Ponzi scheme of tax deductions. The problem we had is when we realized that the guy had stolen, we know about 25 million. We think it could be as high as 50. Amazingly, we put this company into liquidation. We seized this captive manager. We put the captive insurers into liquidation. And the folks that we've stolen from, we've heard from maybe 1, maybe 2, maybe 10%. Because what happens is, this is the other side of the spectrum. The minute someone steals $25 million from someone, and they go to their accountants and their lawyers and they say, you did what? You wrote this off? And he only took 10% of the money? You better keep your mouth shut, because when you go public with this, you could go to jail. You could owe millions of dollars. So they're the person who's a little bit shady is the absolute perfect victim. And we've seen this again and again and again. We've seen PEOs, right, who live on I'll call it the periphery of temporary staffing, and maybe the employees are not categorized properly. They have a secret they're trying to protect. And when an insurance entity comes in and steals from them, they're very careful about cooperating, because they know that whatever they say and whoever they talk to, that bullet could come right back around and come on them. So they are the best victims. And you're going to see it again. At the end of this presentation, we're going to talk about how these rules might be involving the next great fraud. But the next great fraud, whether it's AI, whether it's crypto, whether it's international insurance, believe me, when they come into your office, they're not going to be wearing masks. They're going to look like the smartest, the most respected. They're going to be represented by the best professionals in our industry, and that's the challenge that we face.
Next slide is having a backup plan. And I apologize because this screen isn't working. I blame Greg.
So with that model in mind, where the victims are often a little bit a little bit responsible, I'm going to say knowledgeable about where the frauds are going to come from, that creates a get-out-of-jail-free card for the most sophisticated insurance fraud con artists. Because what they realize is that if they can find a victim base that they can flip on in the end, they've got basically a golden ticket out. And we've seen it happen again and again. We've seen where people in insurance fraud are able to then become cooperating witnesses. I was involved for almost 10 years, where the folks that stole zillions of dollars from a life insurance company, sending mostly elderly policyholders to the limits of the guarantee associations, they had the golden ticket. They were able to testify against the Gambino crime family because they were their partners in some of the investments. And that got them incredible alleviation of their sentences from federal judges, from prosecutors. And so finding the criminal that's more interesting than yourself is a great backup plan. And now, it used to be that we thought that we could attack insurance fraud by following the money all the way to the end. If we took the profit out of it, and if basically when they write the book, if they realized there was no profit at the end, that maybe we would stop the next fraud. Well, what we have found out recently is it doesn't have to be in a traceable banking system. When the Patriot Act came in after September 11th, we just had that sad anniversary. When the Patriot Act came in, it helped us because we were able to seize monies in U.S. banks that had been exported with insurance frauds to other places. We're now not in the crooks are not in the banking system. The crooks, are in alternate finance systems like crypto.
So crypto essentially avoids the banking system. It's untraceable. The movements of money it's very easy to do, and the great criminals will find a way to figure this out. I'll say that no one can get to it, at least at this point. And so that's really troubles me with the efforts, and I try not to be political, but with the efforts of to promote crypto and cryptocurrency now, it's really about hiding money. And so it's real concerns that we have, and we know that's highly involved in insurance fraud.
So the backup plan to the backup plan, which is another rule, we're going to talk about that a little bit later if we have time, has to do with your ability to leave the United States and go to a place where your insurance fraud doesn't seem like it is really, there are no consequences to it. And when we started in this business, there were very few places that people could go. And now there are some very nice, moderately inexpensive, and safe places. And
Well, you could go to Yemen.
Yeah,
Right.
you always could, right? You could always, so I don't know if you all remember when one of the great insurance fraudsters about 20, 30 years ago faked his own death and opened a dive shop in the Maldives. But, he had to stay in the Maldives. Now, because of the changing international relationships that are out there are some very nice places, and there are multiple passport opportunities out there, and extradition is becoming more and more difficult in our world. So this is another challenge that we have to face.
And so we'll get into the backup plan a little bit more later. So this is the insurance agency that we spoke about. This licensed producer was the sole owner. She spoke Spanish, and so she sold insurance for private auto, for business insurance, for workers' comp. And what she would do is she would take the premiums essentially and put them in her pocket. She had spent hundreds of thousands of dollars of victims' money at a local casino. This was, again, this was really difficult because a lot of times when you don't, in law enforcement, when you don't have there's things you qualify a report. And one of the reports is no victim cooperation. So you essentially write a report and you write it off because the victims won't cooperate. And for lazy, I'll just say it, for lazy cops, that's they want to do. They want to do no V co-op, write it off, and go to the next one. We're fortunate we didn't have lazy investigators in our department. They recognized the significance of the crime, the dollar amount. What they didn't understand, and we still don't fully understand, is the amount of victims. We do have Spanish-speaking folks. My last name's Navarro. Unfortunately, I only know the cuss words, but it's my father taught me. I'm sorry. We were able to break those barriers and speak to folks and gain their trust because we're not out to get people. We're out to help people. And so it was tough, but I'll say that we stuck with it. And I guess one of the things, I don't know if it's in here later on, where we talked about seizing the assets. We'll get to that later.
Yeah, actually, when we get to the next slides, we'll talk about some of it. Yeah, Commissioner Navarro was absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm teachable. Commissioner Navarro was absolutely dedicated to the fact that we were not going to stop. We're not going to let any impediment. I mean, this is a community that literally was afraid that if they talked to us, that ICE would be in behind them. They were the folks that in those communities who had started businesses, who had carpentry and roofing. They spoke, not only did they speak Spanish and no one spoke English, but they spoke a type of Spanish, Guatemalan Spanish, that frankly, we had incredible difficulty finding translators. And that was the issue. The issue was that the bad guy, in this case, the bad woman had all the trust in that community, and we had none. So it took, I'm going to say, more than a year for us to even scratch the surface of getting someone to come forward and give us enough information. When we found the information, we found a couple of different schemes. As Commissioner Navarro told you, there was a hunger behind this crime. This was not what I talked about. This was not a crime of excess. This was a woman with an insatiable gambling habit, that if she collected $10,000 in premiums, $9,000 got gambled away that afternoon. We found almost $1 million of records over the course of only 8 months that she had stolen from this community in the form of premiums and had gambled away within 24 hours of getting them. But what she was able to do, the reason she was able to thwart us and keep this Ponzi scheme alive for so long, is that what she would do is she would collect a year's worth of premiums, and then she would pay 1 month, gamble away the other 11 months. 30 days later, there would be a cancellation notice that was a notice of cancellation. She would have stolen from somebody else. She would reinstate that policy for 1 month. When the people got the notices from the insurers, and by the way, the insurers were incredibly cooperative with us in helping us to minimize this fraud, she had all the credibility. She was able to tell these people that that was a mistake, that their insurance was reinstated. So we couldn't tell them differently. We couldn't. Now we actually got a few folks to cooperate, because what she did is, in order to get direct, she got bigger commissions from the carriers by setting things up for direct deposit. In order to get direct deposit, she had all their banking information. And a lot of these new businesses, they don't have controllers, they don't have in-house actual accounting staffs, so they didn't realize that whatever was in their account was being drafted out of their account, regardless of the amount of the premium. So it was really an insidious fraud, and really damaged and injured a lot of people.
You'll see that in one case, she had the individual's debit card, and she was able to withdraw about $380,000. I don't know about you, but I would have missed that. And so we had, when things like this happen, when people are victimized, they're embarrassed, they're ashamed. And in some cases, they cannot convey to you or to us the problems that they're having because of the language barrier. And one of the things that always drove me crazy in law enforcement was when police officers would say, "You could speak my language, you're faking it, tell me the truth." When you're interviewing or interrogating someone who doesn't speak English, it doesn't have to be Spanish, it could be any language. And I know how I suffer with trying to speak the broken Spanish and how embarrassed I am to do that. Well, factor that into somebody who's in your space trying to interrogate you. It's really uncomfortable for people. So we were able to get that information from the one guy who had the big loss, and then the smaller ones started coming in. But when we say the smaller ones, people are paying their premiums thinking that they're covered, and then file a claim, there's nothing there. So that's what really made it really difficult. Time's flying by, so we're going to go on to the next one, okay?
Yeah, okay. Well, I want to talk there that with regards to the agency, we had obstacles that we've never encountered before, that we don't normally encounter, because we have a seizure statute, but it applies to insurers. We have a rehabilitation statute. It applies to insurers. We have a liquidation statute. It applies to insurers. In order to try to fix this problem, we had to essentially create a model to avoid victimizing the victims. And when I talk about that, you talk about if someone thought that they had insurance and their employee fell off a roof, we had to make sure that when we seized, we didn't inadvertently cancel policies or interfere with the policies that were in effect. We had the same problem in terms of the language barrier. The language barrier wasn't just a language barrier with the victims. We have a language barrier with the courts in trying to explain to the courts why we needed to come in and why we needed to seize this insurance agency. We have another problem with agencies and with captive managers and with parent companies, which is they can go bankrupt. And when they file for bankruptcy, that bankruptcy judge, he doesn't know from McCarran-Ferguson. He doesn't know from insurance regulators. Bankruptcy is a tremendous impediment to us enforcing insurance fraud that exists in this type of issue.
You didn't mention that in this specific case, we were trying to seize assets so that we could return them to the rightful owner. And the judge didn't understand that, well, how can you seize these assets and no one's been even arrested or convicted of a crime?
Yeah,
So that was, in many cases, we were educating the courts on not educating, that's probably not the right way to say it, but helping inform them on why we needed to seize those assets before she gambled them away.
So we also, this year, ready?
Oh, yeah, you didn't mention that there's no money. You know, when we took over this company, there's no money to run the company, right? There's no, we had to pay our lawyers, right? We had to use phone banks with interpreters. And so it's not like a company that goes insolvent where there's typically money left over, right? So you can hire the actuaries, hire the lawyers to do all the court proceedings. There was nothing left. So kudos to my good friends who really stepped up and helped the department when we needed them when there was no finances.
Yeah, and this is why I say you break it, you own it. In other words, when you're going to take over an insurance agency, when you're going to take over a captive manager, when you're going to take over someone not an insurer, we really don't have a lot of rules, but we know that if we break it, we own it. We can create. And it's the first rule of insurance regulation: try to do no harm. Right. So we had to put together a knowledgeable staff of how to run an agency. That's not something we're pretty good at running insurance companies with all the training that we've had in liquidations and rehabilitations. But running insurance agencies is a whole nother business model that we had to create, along with, as Trini said, the telephone banks, the computer access, the pay systems in order to interact with the insurers. And it was a challenge that, like I said, through Commissioner Navarro's direction and really his stubbornness, we were able to eventually do a lot of good here.
So she was able to, and I know it's, how do you commit the fraud? She was able to cultivate a community where she gained their trust. She spoke the same language. She sought out people who she thought she could victimize. She took advantage of those who had assets, all for her gambling habit. So we're going to talk a little bit more moving on to the next one, and that's the captive manager. This one was, it's not a traditional insurance company, right? And so the captive laws are vastly different from laws that pertain to traditional insurance companies, and Jim's an expert in that.
So this is the opposite end of the economic spectrum. This is someone who established himself and his organizations with in Wellington, Florida, where some of the high-end horse racing and horse jumping and the polo pony community, and they have a community of their own that moves around the country to Saratoga and to these are some of the wealthiest individuals, some of them generational wealth that goes back many generations, and he was able to establish himself. Keep moving a bit. Give me some pictures. He was able to establish himself in that community by investing the time and investing the money and doing the things necessary in order to become a respected member of that ultra high net worth community. And the one thing that he realized is that there was a common need among the ultra net worth community, which is not to pay taxes. And he set up captives, and he set up his expertise in captives, and he had the armament not only of being a wealthy and visible member of the horse community, but he also had the yachts, he had real estate, he had business after business, he defied all the odds, and in doing that, he got trust, and in that he established, with his lawyers sitting next to him, and his accountant sitting next to him, and his actuary sitting next to him, he explained to these people how he could provide tax deductions with the captive investments, and that he could set up captives for them, and they could have their cake and they could eat it too. They could get deductions, they had no risk, they could have no gains being taxed on their investments, and they could essentially have their money back. And he was able to, as we pointed out earlier, we know that he's stolen $25 million. We think he may have stolen as much as 50. We have found fishing boats. We have found yachts. We have found all these things that allegedly were where the invested dollars that he was a fiduciary were going. He did that by creating and having major law firms major accounting firms, I'm sorry, create statements that only show the asset side of what those assets were worth. And no one knew that they were 99% encumbered by, and he was able to do a complicated series of frauds.
Yeah, so probably a year before we really got into this investigation, we were looking at this captive company specifically because the assets that they had weren't liquid, right? So we sent investigators down to Florida to see, I think it's back, the properties that they owned that they were saying were, assets that were part of the captive surplus. In some cases, there were just lots. There was an address, but there was no property on there. The 64-foot yacht, which was valued, I think, at $3.5 million, something like that, he sold it. We didn't get a chance to seize that. We didn't get a chance to take a ride on it. I kind of wanted to do that, maybe throw a line out. So, I mean, these folks are sophisticated, right? And, he had purchased a clothing company, or he had monies tied into assets that weren't, you weren't able to liquidate that if you had to pay claims. So even before, and this is a challenge, the fraud folks in the room know this, is we can give, prosecutors an investigation like this on a silver platter. We have victims, we have theft, we have folks who have admitted to it, we have documented through video and other things, and then the prosecutors who often are prosecuting murders and rapists and drug dealers don't think that insurance fraud is a crime. When we've actually heard judges say, well, that's insurance fraud, it's not really a crime. And so it's one of the impediments for these cases. We're fortunate that ultimately we were able to get, after a year, to get the feds involved. And then that's where the conversation came about that, we're really concerned about the captive managers see a number of captives, and unfortunately, it was commingling of funds. But we wanted to make sure that if there were funds available for potential victims that, who had to pay claims, that money would be there. And that's when Jim had mentioned earlier, when the FBI said something along the lines as we don't see victims, we see co-conspirators.
Commissioner, you could refer to me as Mr. Black if we're going to have these rules.
Yes, sir, Mr. Black.
Keep going.
Got it.
So there are two aspects when I say the grass is always greener in a foreign country, and one of them we'll talk about, which is the extradition difficulties that we've been running into the last several years. But this is a little bit different. There is an unbelievable suspension of disbelief among folks when they're dealing with foreign regulators, foreign countries, foreign laws. So the really sophisticated con artists have figured out that if they can layer an element of international business, of international cooperation, of international investment over their insurance fraud, it allows them to stay one further step ahead of our regulatory enforcement. And we've seen this again and again and again. Vesttoo was, Commissioner Navarro and I spoke about this a couple of years ago. Vesttoo was a situation where it is amazing that they were able to fool the Israeli intelligence services. They were able to fool the SEC. They were able to fool the insurance services in the United States, in Bermuda, by running this Ponzi scheme where everybody was talking to somebody else from a different country. And when someone sees something come back in Chinese, frankly, there's a lack of comprehension the way that Trini talked about it, and that's a rule. The rule is the grass is not greener, the tax laws are not that much different, the investment laws are not that much different, and don't ever suspend your disbelief just because somebody said, well, that's not how it works on the Channel Islands. They have a special rule. They don't verify ID. That's something that they don't do. Because what we found is that the really sophisticated insurance fraud con artists have now taken what used to be a domestic scheme and almost always have put it into international situations, whether it's through phony reinsurance, whether it's through investment, whether it's through phony private equity investment, whether it's through where their IT systems are located. They've actually learned the international game much quicker than enforcement has.
So Sean O'Neill yesterday mentioned, when you're investigating these types of frauds, to try to think like the criminal, not to think like law enforcement. And that's sometimes really difficult to do. And I mentioned earlier about the challenges we've had, and it's not to disparage the FBI in any way. I know they do great work, lots of cases. This is just, in some cases, just small, in their mind, small dollar amounts, just a little tiny state of Delaware. And I worry about the priorities with respect to what's happening in the FBI, with the shrinking of the workforce and the focus on things that often are considered or potentially considered political. I worry that we need to refocus on these investigations because they're easy to commit, but they're difficult to investigate because of oftentimes it's just not. It used to be just state lines, but now it's overseas in other countries. You mentioned. You could go to Yemen, right? And that, places like Sudan, you could probably go to, to Russia until they find you and kill you, right? So,
We go to the next
yeah,
one.
go to the next one.
So the big guys have money, and the big con artists have money, and they get a lot of benefits out of that. And as someone famously said, the bigger the lie, the more they believe. Well, the rules of living abroad have always been that it's a balance of lifestyle, cost, risk, safety, and ability. And as Trini mentioned, you could always go to the Congo, to Yemen, to places that are essentially lawless. But that's not where insurance fraud con artists like to be. They don't like to be murdered. They like to be in comfort. And on the other side, Monaco has never had an extradition treaty with the United States, but it costs millions of dollars a year to live there, even in modest means. So if they didn't steal $1 billion, frankly, Monaco wasn't so good. The problem that we've had over the last several years is that our changing relationship with various countries has created a lot of very efficient and high lifestyle and relatively affordable places, such as Cuba. Now, Cuba, for example, when the Obama administration reinstated our relationship with Cuba as part of that détente with the Cuban government, many financial fraudsters were extradited from Cuba to the United States. Now that we have a much more hostile relationship with Cuba again, Cuba is a safe haven. One of the things that the con artists do is they evaluate the risk of changing relationships. We have, for example, no extradition treaties with Vietnam and Cambodia. They're affordable. They're some of the most beautiful areas of the world, some of the most beautiful beaches in the world. But even though they don't have an extradition treaty, right now they have a fear of China geopolitically. So they're cooperating with the United States. So where Cambodia and Vietnam were not cooperating with the United States 5 years ago, now because of the changing geopolitical issues with China, they are now extraditing the financial fraudsters back. But on the other hand, because of the Ukraine war, Belarus is a very nice place to live, and absolutely, like Russia, will not extradite any of their citizens. But a big side business that has flourished in the last few years is that there are major international law firms out there who will not only assist in allowing these people to get away and to live comfortably in other countries beyond the reach of our law enforcement, but they will actually get citizenship. And one of the big things that has started is this citizenship through investment process. So Nevis and St. Kitts, which some of you may have heard of, which is a beautiful twin island country in the southern hemisphere. Dominica. If you have $250,000, you can buy citizenship. You buy citizenship there, you have a passport from there. The advantage there is you're not stuck there. you can take that Dominican passport and you can travel mostly everywhere in the world without fear of being extradited. So it's becoming monumentally more difficult. If you put that together with the fact that the crypto is almost untraceable and the incentive for some of these folks to commit crimes is irresistible. So there is something, I'll call it existential, meaning that this good versus evil has, of course, been going on. And the folks that are drawn to this, like I said, we're not here talking about the desperate. We're talking about folks that if they were in the legitimate industry would be very, very successful in anything that they did. But they are choosing to steal. They are choosing to not have any feel for their victims. They are choosing not to play by the rules. Someone said the crooks are smarter. They have to be. I don't know if that's true because for generations, people have debated whether or not it's an advantage to not have to play by the rules. But certainly they don't play by the rules. I was trying to come up with some lessons to leave everybody with to make sure. And what is it? Because the next great fraud is already happening, whether it's in AI, whether it's in black box underwriting, whether it's in whatever it's going to be. We know that the criminals are out there. They're smart, they're working hard, and it's something that they're going to do for excess. And those three rules are, remember, they don't wear masks anymore. They look like whatever community is they're going to victimize. So if they're going to make billions if they're going to victimize private equity, they're going to have memberships in the best associations and societies that serve as private equity. If they're going to go after a Guatemalan community, they're going to be the coach of the Guatemalan community's Little League team. They look like us. They look like the people they're going to steal from. It's still true that if somebody tells you that something was too good to be true, they're lying.
It always is.
It always is. It's the one tell that you can always depend on. And it's easy because we live in a world right now where every day we wake up and we see something in the paper that was too good to be true. It could be medical advancement.
He still reads the paper, by the way.
Yeah, that's right. I do.
No one else does.
But we live in a world that is moving so fast. With AI, there are so many promises. With computer power, there are so many promises. With medicine, there are so many promises that people suspend their disbelief and actually believe in the story. But the story in insurance doesn't change all that much. If a line of business had an 80% loss ratio since Noah insured the Ark, no one's going to come along and say they have a better idea and they have a 30% loss ratio. Anything that's too good to be true isn't. And the last thing is that you can tell the one personality trait that you will always see in a con artist is the fight or flight response. They almost never have a measured response to an inquiry. They never have a measured response to a question. They never have a measured response to an audit. They either get all their lawyers to sue you right away, they're calling the governor, they're doing something to stop you, or suddenly they're in Yemen.
So, Greg, we're almost right on time. I think we left just a couple minutes. And I know we went over a lot of details about these two cases. If anyone wants to speak to us afterwards, Mr. Black has plenty of time.
And Commissioner Navarro would be happy to talk about, relive the Eagles game.
Yeah. So,
And we have enough time, so that's good. No more Eagles talk. No. I want to thank them both very much. They had a good presentation. We are right at time, like he said. If you have questions, want any more, contact me. So thank you both.